Welcome. My name is Stephanie Poley, and I'm with the Parent Support Program at Camry Child and Family Services, and I've been here for about 14 years. And one of the most common questions I've heard over the years is, why do I get so angry with my kids? So today I'm going to help you understand why this might be happening and some ideas about what you can do about it. So I'm going to pop open my slideshow here. So I just want to make a quick note to ask parents and caregivers to remember that parent education is not a one-size-fits-all topic. What you're about to hear is meant to be integrated with your own personal values and beliefs as a caregiver. And here at Camry, we offer individual caregiver support sessions so that you can take what you've learned throughout our in-person, online, and recorded groups and make it individualized to your family. And at the end of the slideshow today, you can access some of the information about how you can contact us and inquire about these services. So today's group is based on a book called The Surprising Purpose of Anger by Dr. Marshall B. Rosenberg. And it follows his work that focuses on nonviolent communication. One of the things I love to point out to families is that anger is not bad. I think we often tell our kids that anger is bad, but we have to remind ourselves and our children that anger isn't bad and it doesn't make us a bad person to have it. The important part is what we do to manage our anger and after it comes up. So anger is an alarm that tells us that we are thinking in ways that are not likely to get our needs met and that we're more likely to get involved in interactions that are not going to be very constructive for anyone. So here we're going to look at 4 main steps to handling our anger. The first step is to identify the stimulus or trigger for our anger without confusing it for the cause. So the stimulus trigger is the event or action that occurred just before we got angry. For example, it might be someone else's words or actions. The cause is something internal, the image or judgment that is making us angry. So it might be more about how we interpret the other person's words or actions. Taking a closer look at that, it's very easy to mix up the two concepts, but I think it's important to clarify which one is each so that it helps us understand our own anger. The trigger tends to be something external. Someone cuts in front of you at the grocery store lineup, things like that, where it's a small action or something that someone said. The cause of the anger tends to be internal. So I feel as I do because I'm telling myself thoughts about the other person's actions that imply wrongness on their part, or it might imply something about me that someone would treat me that way. Some examples. So I'm going to go through here 4 different statements, and I'd like you to follow along and try to think to yourself which of these would be a trigger and which would be a cause. And it's just meant to help us identify the two a little bit better. So the first one says, I'm angry because you bumped into me without even saying sorry. The second one says, I'm angry because I'm exhausted. I haven't been sleeping well and I'm feeling anxious a lot of the time. And the third is, I'm angry because you are never grateful for anything I do. No one in this family says thank you for everything that I take care of around the house. And the fourth one is, I'm angry because when you yell at me, it makes me feel worthless, like I'm not worthy of being spoken to politely. So if we take another look at these statements, the first one, I'm angry because you just bumped into me without even saying sorry. That's a trigger. It's an external event that caused or I shouldn't say caused, that triggered someone to get angry. In the second one, I'm angry because I'm exhausted. I haven't been sleeping well and I'm feeling anxious. That's a cause. It's an internal reason. The third, I'm angry because you're never grateful of anything that I do, is a trigger. And the final one, I'm angry because you yell at me and it makes me feel worthless, is a cause, right? Because it's internal and there's an interpretation of the actions. So the second step we want to look at is to identify the cause of the anger now. And this is the internal image or judgment that is making us angry. Be conscious that it isn't simply what others do or say that make us angry, but rather it's our evaluation of what has been done that causes our anger. Um, like the example earlier about someone cutting in front of you in line in the grocery store. Sometimes we might have an interpretation that they're being disrespectful, or that it's something about ourselves that's made them act that way. And oftentimes when we say something, we find that the other person's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you there. So the cause is something within us that responds to what others do. And that is the real cause of the anger. In identifying the cause, it's how we look at the situation that is the actual cause of the anger rather than the situation or the trigger itself. The problem with this is that when we mistake the external stimulus as being the cause of our anger, we want to get rid of the anger by taking it out on the other person, hitting, screaming, passive aggressiveness, however you might manage your anger. I think that this happens a lot in caregiving and parenting, because we confuse our anger as being caused by our child. And then we might lash out at them by yelling or getting frustrated. However, the anger itself is actually being caused by something that the caregiver is telling them themselves in that situation. I know for me, I have two young children that are 3 and 5. And just today actually had this exact thought of I was getting angry. And when I took a step back to actually evaluate the real cause of the anger, I told myself it was because my daughter was being rude. But really what was happening on the inside was I was telling myself that I'm a bad mom. I'm a bad parent. I can't even get my kids to listen to me. My kids are rude, and that's because I'm an awful parent. And I think even someone who is familiar with this material, often in my own emotions, get lost in them. And it's really hard for me to not immediately have those thoughts. So when I do, I try to go through this process to reevaluate the thought and think, what's actually causing this anger right now? There's 4 ways that people tend to evaluate triggers. One is by taking others' actions personally as a sign of rejection. And this evaluation usually results in feelings of being hurt rather than anger. The second one is to look within oneself to see what your needs are, which makes you way more likely to get your needs actually met because you can identify them quite quickly. Number 3 is putting yourself in another person's shoes and exploring why they did what they did, trying to understand their needs. People tend to not feel angry with this evaluation because they're focused on the needs and feelings of others rather than themselves. And I would say this one works really well with children. Although, if we're using this one with adults, you also need to be clear with your boundaries as well and make sure that that's not getting stepped over just because you're not getting angry about it. And then the 4th one is to think in terms of wrongness of other people for behaving as they did. This evaluation will always lead to feelings of anger. Personally, I find I approach most stuff with number 3, especially adults. But I find with my own children, I tend to default to number 4, which isn't great. And I have to sit there and reevaluate a lot of the time. And I'm still trying to think of why that always happens. But I think sometimes with our own children, we're so emotionally invested that it's hard to be calm and think. I know when my kids are angry, it elevates my mood as well. And it's really hard for me to think rationally. So I encourage you to take a look at these 4 and think, not just if you fall into one category, but when you may fall into one category or another, and which one you tend to use the most. So step 3 is to identify the need that is the root cause of our anger. This is built on the assumption that we get angry because our needs are not being met. The judgment we make of other people, which cause our anger, are really alienated expressions of unmet needs. So we tend to make judgments and get angry at people based on the needs we don't have met. The difficulty with this is that we're often not in touch with our needs, and therefore we can't express them and we can't ask for what we want. I can't tell you how many other parents I've spoken to where they're getting angry. They're, talking about their partner or talking about an in-law or a grandparent or another caregiver, and they're getting really frustrated. And then when I ask them the question of what it is that they want, and they just can't really express it. They can't express what the actual need is. And all they can live in is the anger. So part of working through these steps is to go backwards to actually identify that unmet need so that they're not getting triggered and getting angry in the moment. So one thing we need to do is develop a literacy of needs, figure out what those needs are. Step 3 requires that individuals become conscious of their needs and develop a greater vocabulary of expressing those needs. So I found for me, one of the most helpful things I've done is just write out a list. What do I need? What are the things that are missing? What are the gaps in my life? Before I looked at anger and any of that other stuff, I just had to take a step back and look at what are some of those needs, and how can I create a vocabulary of what those needs are so that when the time comes, I'm able to express that to someone else. I know for me, a vocabulary or a word that comes up often is freedom. I need to feel free. And I think when you have young children, you often feel tethered to your home or tethered to them. And so it's really important for me to be able to express to others that I need a break from my children and that I need to be able to just go to the grocery store without spending 45 minutes getting them ready. And so that key word of freedom is a really important piece to add to my vocabulary. So I encourage you to think about what are some words that you feel are your needs. When we can identify our needs, we often become free from the feeling of anger. The anger is not repressed, but it just becomes transformed into need-serving feelings. So the basic function of feelings is to serve our needs. We feel a certain way, but there's always an underlying need underneath it. But anger is often a distraction from getting the real need met. For example, if a primary caregiver is parenting 24/7 without any breaks or time to do things for themselves, they may find themselves getting more angry with their child. And I can't tell you how often I hear this. And the cause of the anger is not in the actions of their child, although the parent may express it that way and say, oh, it's because my child's doing this, but rather it's that their patience is wearing thin. They're totally depleted. Because they haven't been able to do anything for themselves that recharges them and brings them joy. And so often every little thing that the child is doing is causing anger because they have nothing left to give. So, I mean, I'm thinking that'll sound familiar to a lot of you out there. Some examples. So I just threw up a few statements here, and just, there is no right or wrong answer. It's just words that I often hear parents saying, or statements. And so it's for you just to sit back and try to explore what the need might be behind the statement. And the ones that come up for you are probably the most likely ones that actually apply to you as well. So I often hear people say, you never help me with anything. And often, I think support and the need there is to have support, to have help. If you loved me, you would clean your room and do as I ask. I think the need to be seen, the need to be loved. I think here too, a lot of parents want their child to do what they're asking them to do. And there's a need for respect, but I have a lot of families that I've worked with through the years where mom or dad will just say to me, I need to have a clean house. And when we explore that further, it's about their own anxiety, and the tidiness and the cleanliness helps them feel calm because their space isn't physically chaotic. So there's so many needs that could be behind a statement like that. The last one says, all you care about is your work. You barely spend any time with me or the kids. Here sounds like a really clear need of quality time with a partner, or quality time as a family. And that's really important for a lot of people. So the fourth step involves actually speaking out loud. So the first three steps are very internal. It's about processing. And I know it sounds like it's going to take a long time to do all that stuff, but I think once you get some practice and you do it often, it moves a lot faster. But the fourth step involves four things that need to be said aloud. One is to reveal the stimulus or the trigger. What has the other person done that's in conflict with our needs being fulfilled? And then the second thing is to express how we're actually feeling. Remember that anger is not the feeling itself, but first needs to be transformed into feelings like hurt, scared, sad, frustrated. The third is to follow up by expressing the needs that are not being fulfilled. And the fourth is to state a clear present request of what we want from the other person in relation to our feelings and unmet needs. So an example might be with using all 4 points is something like this. You didn't clean the house like I asked you to. I'm really hurt that you didn't see how important it was to me. It makes me feel like you don't care that I'm so overwhelmed. Number 3, I really need some help. I cannot do this alone. And 4 would be, I need your support in maintaining this household on a regular basis. It would be nice if you could start by tidying up the house before we have to put the kids to bed tonight. Yeah. Step 4 with small children. So I added this part in because I think with younger children, we know, if we go back to this slide, we know clearly we're not going to be able to say this many words. And even what's on this slide here is an example, you'd be lucky to say that many. So we do have to simplify our words. But I think if you can start small and just get the general concept, you as a parent will feel better. You'll start to feel calm. I think just in identifying your own need, you may not even feel like you need to express it to your child. You might find that your patience is growing just because you've understood your own needs. But we also want to use these words with young children so that as they grow older, they become familiar with these statements and they understand what to do with them. We can't control other people's responses to when we say this, but part of it is just to calm our own anger. And if we set that example for our child, then they're more likely to use that in the future as well. So, I don't expect my 3-year-old son to be making all 4 statements to me, but I know he's pretty close because he hears me going through these each time. And so an example I've used here that I've done with him is just to say, it's not okay to hit people. It hurts, it should say my body. It hurts my body and my feelings when you hit me. If you want something, you need to ask kindly. Can we practice together when you're feeling better so you know how to ask kindly next time? And so, it's not all about me. I think in parenting, it is mostly about your child. But I know that just having this sort of script ready when I know that there's certain things that he's doing that are triggering me makes it easier for me in the moment not to react with yelling and screaming. Or threatening to take away TV time, which doesn't usually work very well. But then I'm using constructive words that he can learn from and I can use to help myself feel calm. So when we're faced with anger, it's important just to take a deep breath. The most important thing you can do, especially when you're angry with a child, is to calm yourself first if you can. And if you can't, maybe you need to take some time away. The second would be to stop and look inside and ask yourself, what am I telling myself that's making me so angry? Am I telling myself I'm a bad parent? Am I telling myself I'm not good enough? Third is when you've identified your unmet need and you feel ready to interact with others, then you can verbalize your observations, feelings, and unmet needs. And then 4 is to make your request. So with practice, this can all happen very quickly. And you don't need to get so stuck on the 4 steps. Sometimes it doesn't really work and you can't go through all 4 of them. But I try to make a habit of when I've noticed at the end of the day that I've just been really angry that day, I try to go through some of the scenarios and work through the 4 steps to see what I could have said. And then when they come up again, I'm more likely to be able to use all 4 with more ease. Create a list of the kind of judgments that are likely to go on inside of you when you're angry, and then review this list. What was I needing that was being expressed through the judgment? And until this process becomes more natural, just ask for a timeout. It's okay. I can't tell you how many times I've been so angry with my kids and I've just taken a deep breath and I'm like, wow, I can't calm myself right now. And I've just walked into the other room and yep, they follow me. But even sometimes those 2-3 seconds that I've gotten to myself are enough just so that I can think and process without just screaming or yelling at them. I think the concepts of punishment and anger often go hand in hand when we're talking about caregiving and parenting. These 2 concepts, they're kind of thinking of them leads us to be angry. And it's thinking that implies that people deserve to suffer for what they've done. We often want our kids to feel bad or receive some sort of punishment if they've done something wrong. It's sort of a natural thing because that's how it's always been. It's the belief that others shouldn't have done what they did and they deserve some sort of punishment for doing it rather than just trying to learn and be different. The problem is that punishment rarely works to get our needs met, and it leaves us feeling empty and unresolved. Um, Expressing anger. So, fully expressing anger entails not only expressing to others the feelings behind the anger, but also having the other person get it and really understand your needs. And unfortunately, I can't always guarantee that they will. But I do, in my own life, I found the more often I can express the unmet need with the same person, my husband often, the more he's likely to get it. So it doesn't always happen on the first try, but with a few tries, he starts responding a little bit better. The easiest way to have someone else understand your needs is to first empathize with them and understand their perspective. I know you didn't get a lot of sleep. I know that you're exhausted. I can see that it's been a really stressful day for you. And oftentimes, doing that first will help soften the startup so that when you go to talk about yourself and your own anger, it'll be received a lot better because you're already trying to empathize with the other person. With that said, it's not always necessary to fully express anger. Sometimes we can let it go without needing to have a full dialogue with the other person who made us angry. And I think this is really important to remember with young children, because if you've got an 18-month-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 16-year-old sometimes, we know that that full conversation is not going to be able to take place at times. But just being able to go through in our minds this process is often enough to at least calm our own anger. There's also many situations where it could be unsafe to express feelings of anger, like someone cutting you off at the grocery store. We don't know if the other person's going to react well to you being angry, whether you phrase it positively or you lash out. And so we want to make sure that in situations where you could be possibly in danger or unsafe, that we don't want to go into expressing our anger. So my final thought would be to go through a recent time that you've been angry. And it can be with your children, it can be with a partner, it can be with a mother-in-law, a father-in-law, anyone really, even a stranger. I often like to think of times where I felt bad afterwards. I felt angry, but I knew I shouldn't have felt angry. And I try to go through the 4 steps. And so you can go back to the slideshow, you can go back through the video and try to work through the steps while thinking about the event that took place. And the nice thing is the first 1 or 2 times, you're probably going to need to write it out a little bit. But after a while, it starts to become really natural and you won't need to write it out every single time. So it may feel like work the first 1 to 3 times, but after that, it should start to be a little bit easier, especially when you've taken the time to additionally write a list of some unmet needs. Because what you'll find is if you pick a few scenarios of where you're getting angry, you may find that it's the same unmet need every time that's causing your anger. So I hope this is really helpful for you. And if you have any follow-up questions, please remember that we do have services where we can do one-on-one sessions with families. And you can call our front desk at 604-436-9449 to inquire if you qualify for any of our services, or you can email us at info@camray.ca. And thanks for being here today.